Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. Apologize for apologize for the delay, and thank you for sticking with me through that momentary issue. But we're going to go ahead and get started this afternoon talking about equitable acceleration through coherence and the mathematical practices. Some of you all are mind readers, which is fantastic. Because the first couple of questions I was going to ask, and I would like for everyone to kind of chime in the chat box, is what is or are the grades or courses of students with whom you primarily work? So are you a third grade teacher? Are you a geometry teacher? You're an instructional coach and work with grades 6 through 8? And then the second question that I would love to just see have some folks chime in the chat box. What from the title or the description for this session drew you to attend? In other words, what are you looking for? There were multiple opportunities at this time to attend, multiple sessions you could have attended, and you have come to talk about math and would love to hear a little more about why. And as you're chiming in, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Tim Truitt. I am the Director of Mathematics for edreports.org. I have EdReports. I'm not going to say a whole lot about EdReports in particular today. We were founded in 2015. We review instructional materials for K-12 mathematics, K-12 English language arts, K-8 science, and we're getting ready to branch into high school science as well. Probably starting in 2022. But before my time at EdReports, I have been with EdReports since 2015. Before that time, I was a curriculum specialist for Jefferson County Public Schools in Louisville, Kentucky. And that is where I live. It's right outside Louisville, Kentucky. So I'm actually 3 hours ahead right now, 4:37 here in the Eastern time zone. I was curriculum specialist for grades 6 through 12. Before that, I spent 3 years as an instructional coach for high school, grades 9 through 12. And before that, I was a high school mathematics teacher for 10 years. Ended my teaching career in the classroom in Jefferson County. Before that, I taught in public and private schools in Kentucky and in Georgia. And before I kind of move in to the next part, I just want to send a shout out to Jeff Crawford. Some of you might know Jeff reached out and invited me to speak and to talk with you all today, and really appreciate him reaching out, and also really appreciate the work that he did for EdReports and helping us get our high school reports and review process off the ground. So if you're still working on kind of what you teach, where you primarily teach, what you're looking for today, thank you, Tanya. I hope it's Tanya for chiming in, and Shannon also, thank you. If you're still working on those responses, feel free to continue to drop them in the chat box, and going to kind of keep moving forward. So a couple of objectives for today. Participants will be able to describe how unfinished learning can be addressed through the acceleration of learning grade level content, and how instructional materials that are in particular built upon coherence and EMPs can facilitate in the learning of grade level content. So we're going to start out again. This summit is the Future Focused Educator Summit. We're going to start out taking a little bit of a look back, and then we're going to define a couple of terms, in particular how we're going to talk about unfinished learning and acceleration. We're going to kind of then begin to look into the future, to think forward, right? Here we sit not only at the beginning of the 2021-2022 school year, but we're sitting at the beginning of hopefully what continues to be like a return to a little bit of in-person schooling, and just in general, hopefully a new way of moving forward. in education, and in particular, mathematics education. We are going to definitely look at a couple of examples, and then we'll have some time at the end for questions and feedback as we go. So past planning experiences, right? Starting out, taking a little bit of a look back. Now, I'm not going to touch on, I certainly know in my own experiences as a teacher that there were, there's always days where you kind of find yourself at the last minute, you got to scramble to come up with something. And on those days, maybe we haven't put our best lesson plans or unit plans forward. But we're not going to talk about those days. We're going to talk about the good days when we kind of really have gotten to sit down and think about our students, where they are, the content that we're getting ready to teach, and what we need to do for those students as we move forward, right? And we would always kind of start with the content. In a lot of ways, we would start in thinking about the content, the grade level standards. And of course, I've pulled this directly from the Washington office of the Superintendent for Public Instruction. A lot of these links and a lot of things I'll reference for the next couple of minutes are there, right? And so we would, maybe it looked different. Maybe we have them in print, but we start by looking at our standards. And so, we have lots of different grade levels represented as I look through the chat box. All the way, I see all the way from first grade up into high school. And so a lot of different things along the way. But we would start with our grade level standards, oh, I'm sorry, you're not seeing the second tab that opened up. Hold on one second. I apologize. I'm still getting used to hop in a little bit. So again, I pulled this. This is a link that directly lives out of the office of the Superintendent for Public Instruction. We would identify what standards are coming up, or maybe those standards were identified for us through a school curriculum map or a district curriculum map. But we would go in, we would look at the content, and then we would kind of start going from there. And part of what we might do is to start looking for tasks that, and one site, I apologize for the switching. I thought, let me see, is it going to? Tell you what, we're just going to do it. Nope, it doesn't like that. It's only letting me share tabs. I apologize. Here we go. So then there's lots of different places that we could go to look for individual tasks, things of that nature. Illustrative Mathematics is a very good website. A lot of you might know that they've created their own set of materials. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But we would go and we would start looking for tasks that align to the standards that we needed to teach. And in good cases, we would have some things, some information that would align to or support us in implementing those tasks. But there might be other things that we weren't getting. And so then maybe we start to look out. We start to look to other things because that was just an individual task with an individual standard. And so, as we know in mathematics, there's coherence. There's coherence within the grades that I'll think of as horizontal coherence during our time today. There's also coherence across the grades. And so we would begin to go to other resources to help us in our planning. right? We want to build that coherence in. We want to be able to make connections to grade level learning, but also prior grades, future grades. We would use documents like the progressions documents. Again, that lives in the OSPI website. Also, the coherence map from Student Achievement Partners. And both of these sets of both of these resources, again, they kind of provide more than just a standard and a task aligned to that standard. They begin to look at coherence within and across grade levels. In some instances, they do begin to make connections to other content areas, whether it's social studies, science. But in both of these cases, as we got in there, again, these largely became individual tasks or maybe a few tasks grouped together. But then we keep having to go back to these things and we're still working this and trying to figure it out in the scope of what a school or district might share with us, something of that nature. And we still have a little bit more to do, right? Because we're putting all this in. And again, if we're just getting individual tasks, this is maybe we're planning for 3, maybe 5 days. And then we go back and we start looking for sort of even bigger things, right? We would like lessons that span multiple days or units. And so we would start going, again, even more websites, the formative assessment lessons from the Mathematics Assessment Resource Service, MARS, or the Shell Center. Again, these are all resources that we have access to. They're aligned to the standards, but yet they still, even the best of the lessons or the best of the units, a lot of times when we find those, and this is where we get to step 4 on the current slide, we might get several days worth of lessons. Then we still have the daunting task as educators of going in and thinking about what assessments are we going to create, whether it's like a pre-unit assessment, maybe it's a mid-unit or an end of unit. We then have to begin to think about differentiation strategies, right? Range of learners, advanced learners. We think about learners that are on track but need multiple representations to deal with. We have learners, again, in the vein of unfinished learning, that they're needing to, we need to fill some gaps in for those students. Not to mention, if we have special education students from special populations, right? What types of differentiation do we need for students who maybe have visual issues that we're going to help them overcome, or auditory issues, or any host of things? And of course, not lest we're not forgetting anything, English learners, and thinking about ways in which we can further incorporate student agency and identity. And all of those things we're doing as teachers, if not daily, weekly, maybe monthly. And this all takes a lot of time. This is a lot of time. And then not to mention, we implement a lesson, maybe something doesn't go real well, or maybe we get to the end of the lesson and we realize more is needed, or how are we going to move on, or we need to advance it. And now we're responsible for coming up with all those things as well. I know I can't see anyone. I hope that this sort of past planning experience, as I'm laying it out, I hope it's not true, but I have a feeling that it is. This is kind of what we've kind of largely had to do, because instructional materials weren't always where we needed them to be. We didn't have things that were aligned to the standards, built upon coherence, and then began to also to provide aligned assessments and differentiation strategies that were all a part of the package and part of the way in which the materials were created that we could work from. So I'd like to pause for just a moment before I move on, and ask if there's any questions at this point about kind of any of the resource, any of the different links or anything like that. Just pausing for a moment. Again, you can always feel free to use the chat box or drop questions into the Q&A. I think if you drop into the Q&A, then they come straight to me, or I get to see them. Okay. If you're finishing typing that question, please do. And when it comes in, I will certainly pause and go back to any questions that do pop up. But I kind of want to, I'm going to kind of keep moving forward at this point. So a couple of terms that I want to make sure we talk about a little bit before we go into some future focused planning experiences. So I'm going to pause for a moment and give everyone an opportunity to read this definition of unfinished learning. Thank you, Jennifer and Shannon, for again kind of being mind readers. As you're finishing reading, please drop some thoughts into the chat box. I will say that we're getting ready to pivot, and I am definitely going to talk about, like, I'm definitely putting forward sort of a way in which to address unfinished learning. Yes. I will say that I part of my introduction, I didn't really talk about my true motivation at this point in time for kind of thinking about this topic, and that's my two children. I have a daughter who's about to be a junior in high school, and I have a son who is getting ready to be an 8th grader. And when our schools here in Kentucky shut down back last March of 2020, as most schools across the country, give or take a week or two in there, a lot of things just kind of stopped. Not just math. And when things started back up, I definitely got a sense that in a lot of ways, there wasn't necessarily a real starting point for the teachers, and it was kind of just different ways of going through things. And so, I will be honest and say that part of what I'm going to kind of pivot to is something that I would definitely want to see definitely want to see happening with my kids as they're getting ready to start back. They start back to school in 2 weeks. Here in Kentucky, a lot of schools will start by the middle of August. And so I hope that something like this is taking place. And so what I'm going to talk about in addressing unfinished learning is the idea of acceleration of grade level learning, right? I want to, before I kind of pause for a moment for you to read, this is not about necessarily going, like, we're not necessarily talking about the gifted students and we're moving a grade or more beyond. This is acceleration of learning grade level content. So I'm going to pause there for a moment and again, let you read these couple of quotes. And again, feel free to start dropping comments or questions into the chat box as you finish reading. Right. So as I think about this slide, as I think about these two quotes, I'm kind of going back through the chat box and I'm drawn to Virginia's chat from the previous slide. And she commented, there will be plenty of unfinished learning this year. Right. This year, I think we would all agree with that. And this year, it's so much, right? Because we don't necessarily have a good grasp on what students may or may not have learned or even been introduced to in the grades prior to where we are. We know it's going to permeate with every student to one degree or another, right? And so if we were to approach this coming school year as we've kind of maybe often done in the past, which, we're going to have some sort of pre-assessment and try to find out everything they don't know that students haven't learned yet, we might wind up, at least until Christmas, trying to address all of those things in individual or in small groups before we ever even get to our current grade level, right? And as we know, sorry, I was pausing for a moment to read the chat that just came in. Right, exactly. What have they been introduced to the past year? We don't know, and especially for those of you that maybe you teach in those years, you are working with those students where they're coming like from elementary to middle. So maybe you have students coming from multiple elementary schools into your middle school. Maybe you have you're a freshman teacher or a sophomore teacher, depending again on how your high schools are structured, and they're coming from multiple middle schools into your one school. We don't know, right? And so this idea of acceleration of learning grade level content, we want to start with our grade level and we will work from there, right? We're going to we're going to fill in, we're going to address the learning that students don't yet have in the moments that they need it. And instructional materials should, and now we do have lots of options, actually. We have options that can help us with that. All right. And so to start putting some examples and some visualization to this. So before I jump in and kind of talk about a process, I want to just put out there some of my general starting assumptions, right? All students will come into our classes I've been talking about. They will all have unfinished learning, but they will also all have knowledge on which they can build, right? We don't want to treat students like blank slates. Okay. Yes, they're all going to have some unfinished learning. They all also have knowledge on which we can build. And so to take kind of that asset-based approach, we're going to work with what they bring to the table and into the classroom and build from there, right? As I was just kind of talking about, I'm going to guess that unfinished learning is not the same. Again, whether it's they've come from different schools, they came from different teachers within the school you're currently in. or just the fact that within a given classroom, one student might have done really well learning fractions in third grade and another student didn't do so well. But then maybe those students reversed when it came to learning geometry in third grade. And the student who did really well with fractions didn't do well with geometry. And the student who didn't do well with fractions did well with geometry. So again, all of this is uneven and variation. And so trying to sort through all that would take a lot of time. And another big, all students, not only do they have knowledge they're bringing with them to the classroom, but I do believe that all students at any grade level, they are capable of learning that grade level content and beyond. And they deserve that opportunity to learn. And then the last bullet isn't the last bullet because it's the least. It's last just because to me, it's kind of like the clincher, right? Educators, teachers in the classrooms, those as instructional coaches working, anyone involved in the school deserves a work-life balance. And so if we were to go back to those past planning experiences that I outlined in painful detail earlier, and then we're trying to do that in the face of all the unfinished learning that we have, we don't have that much time in the day or the week or the month or the school year, right? So here's sort of my process, and I will line out several of these steps as we move forward here. We're going to start by working from aligned and usable materials. If your school or district hasn't adopted math materials in a while, then that's the place to start. Is we need materials to adopt. There are lots of options. I was talking with colleagues earlier today. When EdReport started 5 years ago, if I was to say, oh, start from aligned materials 5 years ago, I honestly might have been talking about 1 or 2 sets of materials for kindergarten through 8th grade and 1 or 2 sets of materials for high school. That's no longer the case. There are now multiple sets of materials, not just for K-5 or 6-8 or high school, but there are multiple sets of materials for kindergarten through 12th grade that are aligned to the standards and do already incorporate many of the supports and strategies that educators in the classroom need when it comes to differentiation and when it comes to addressing unfinished learning, right? So we definitely want to start from aligned and usable materials. If you visit EdReport's website, I'm referring to green circles. I'll say it that way. Because of the nature of hop in, I'm not going to hop over to our website. Sorry, bad pun, not intended. But I'm not going to go over to the website and look, but I will say there are lots of options there. Okay. The next big thing, and this is where we start getting into addressing the unfinished learning and the just-in-time supports. We have to learn the coherence of those materials. There's lots of options, but that doesn't mean that all those options address the learning progressions in the same way. Every set of materials and the author or authors that wrote those materials, they make choices within the learning progressions on how they're going to order things. And choices that are made for early in a school year affect the middle and later years. And as I'll show you in just a moment in some diagrams of one set of materials, there can be intentional choices then that not only affect that grade level, they can affect other grade levels before and after. So we have to get to know the materials in that way, in the way in which they were intended to be implemented. We also have to get to know the day-to-day and the year-long supports and strategies that are provided by the series. Get to know them, learn, and let them be a part of what we do. And then once we get to know the coherence, once we get to know the supports and strategies that are there, we will inevitably come to find out that there are still maybe some things that need to be refined, right? I'm not saying revive. I intentionally chose this word refine because it's finishing out little pieces here and there, but it's not making significant revisions to the materials as they're presented. It's not supplementing or adding into the things that are there. It's recognizing what are those finishing pieces that are going to help students connect to the materials so that they can see themselves in the materials. They see their identity, maybe their social identity or their cultural identity within the materials. And that is going to improve their agency, right? That's going to improve agency, big fun word, right? That's going to improve their motivation and their desire to engage. When we can take these quality aligned materials and we then are just putting on these finishing touches, we're not having to build everything from scratch as we have done in the past. And so to start talking about number 2, and then we're going to go in and look at some lessons on this, where you'll get to look at day-to-day and year-long supports that are provided. So I picked on 6th grade. The first thing I want to say, I need to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I sort of already did. I want to reinforce it. I have chosen one set of materials today as sort of just as a way to illustrate the points that I'm talking about. If you know what set of materials this is, I am not necessarily saying go out and use that set of materials. What I'm saying is this is one of those options that is sort of built upon the 4 principles on the prior slide that are going to help us in giving equitable acceleration of learning grade level content and help us to address the unfinished learning that we're going to see, right? So this is one option, but this is kind of a visual way to start to think about some of those steps 2, 3, 2 and 3 in particular on the previous slide. So on this, as you look at this is for 6th grade. I expected a K-12 audience, so I just went right to the middle and picked on a grade. For this particular set of materials, it is a K-12 set of materials, and you're going to see that as we go through the next couple of slides for all the grades. Well, a couple of slides for 6 through 12, and you'll see K-5 in a little bit. But this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about getting to know the coherence at your grade level, right? It isn't just, when I look at this, right, the author, they put this 6-1, this is the first lesson of the year. And I noticed right away, well, 6-1 isn't necessarily a precursor for 6-2, but it is a precursor for 6-4. And then I see as we look across that grade level that, yes, some lessons or some units lead right to the next unit, but some lessons don't. Okay. Or when I get to a unit such as unit 6-6, it isn't just relying upon what students learned in unit 5. It's also relying upon what students learned in unit 2. Right. So this part here is just about, again, getting to know what's in your grade level. But when it comes to dealing with that unfinished learning that we're all going to see, how do materials begin to help us? Well, this is the expanded diagram for this set of materials for grades 6 through 8, right? Now, I want to imagine a moment in the last slide, I was sort of picking on 6th grade. I'm going to pick on a different grade this time. I'm going to pick on 7th grade, right? Well, one thing I noticed right away as I jump into the first unit of grade 7 is that it is dependent, this green arrow, back to unit 2 of 6th grade. So I'm going to accelerate grade level learning. So I'm a 7th grade teacher and I'm going to start with unit 1. And I'm going to, I might immediately run into some things that I'm going, wow, students there's just seemingly things they haven't quite gotten yet. Where can I go for resources? Well, I can go back to this unit 2 from grade 6. Right? I don't have to go out and look around a bunch of different places. My school or district has decided to adopt these aligned materials. I will also say that one aspect of this set of materials is that you can get, and most materials now, is that you can get digital access. So even though I may not be a 7th grade, or I might be a 7th grade teacher, I have access to the other grades digitally. And I can be able to go through and look at these lessons, which we're going to do in just a moment. We go through and look, and I can go from there, right? Or I move from unit 1 into unit 2 in 7th grade, and now I realize, oh, unit 2 has connections back to unit 3 from grade 6. It also has connections back to unit 6 from grade 6. And so these are going to be, when I see that students have unfinished learning on grade level, or as we're attacking grade level content, and I see that students have unfinished learning from previous grades, the materials are going to help me, A, kind of get a sense of what that unfinished learning is, and B, they're helping me know right where to go to get the resources that I might need in addressing that unfinished learning, right? Or I can go back and look and see what were the problems in the tasks that students were being asked to do in the previous grade, that I can then bring into my current grade level content, right? And again, in a set of materials like this, and all the things I'm referencing, there's not just lessons that they can go back to. There are assessments. Again, I kind of mentioned pre-unit assessments or post-unit assessments. All of these different options have those things built in to be able to help you address that unfinished learning from a content standpoint. And so when we're getting to know a set of materials, not only, right, we can look across multiple grades and see, you might be wondering, this particular set of materials, the 9th unit at each grade level is sort of like a putting it all together unit. And so it's like a culminating unit for the year. And so for this 6th grade unit, it's primarily relying on units 3, 4, and 5. The end of year 7th grade unit says, oh, all of grade 7. The end of year 8th grade unit particularly references 8.1, 8.5, and 8.6, right? And then the black arrows in this are connections across multiple grade levels, right? So again, I get to a point in the year, I'm getting to unit 7 unit 7 in grade 8, and the materials are telling me this unit 7 in grade 8 is reliant on unit 6 from grade 6. And again, this is not learning that I would put on every teacher by them individually. I mean, it is important to get to know these things, but these are the kind of things that, and somebody brought up earlier, vertical planning or vertical team planning, right? Again, these are the kind of conversations early in a school year around a set of materials that you would be having across grade levels, right? If you're within the same school. But it might also be, if you're, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a 6th grade teacher, but if again, if everyone's using the same set of materials, in essence, it gives you a place to go back and find information from. This does link back. We'll look at that in just a moment. And then the last picture on getting to know and what the benefits of a series built upon Coherence this way does for us. This is actually, again, I mentioned this is a K-12 series. And this is the diagram for grade 6 through Algebra 2, right? So, and again, I want you to think about, right now we are thinking about addressing unfinished learning. But for those of you, right, for those of us that are math teachers, we wish we had a dime for every time we heard the question, when am I ever going to use this? This diagram can be used in both directions. Not only for going back and addressing unfinished learning, but when I'm on grade level, I can always be pointing, I can know where to point things in the future, right? And so I'm starting the year in Algebra 1, and this is reminding me, oh, even at the beginning of the year of Algebra 1, this set of materials is going to go back to something that was learned at the end of 6th grade. Or it's building on something that was at the end of 6th grade, right? And again, I get further into the year in Algebra 1 and different units, how they go back to previous grade levels or even multiple grade levels back. So I'm going to pause for a moment and see if there are any comments or questions about coherence. With in-grade coherence, sort of that horizontal coherence that would here be represented by looking across each grade level, or the vertical coherence, looking across grade levels from one row to the next, and so on. So I'm gonna pause there for just a moment. So now what we're going to do is look at a couple of different examples. And really get into, so those last couple of slides were largely about step 2, getting to know the coherence of the materials and where those different connections are. These maps that I was showing, no, these are not inside edreports.org. They are a part of the illustrative mathematics materials. And there will be one for K5. It will be there in just a moment. I will take a moment to say illustrative mathematics is released through 2 different publishers. One is LearnZillion. The other is Kendall Hunt. And I actually should say there's a third. McGraw-Hill releases a version of the illustrative mathematics materials for 6 through 12. And so I am drawing from that set of materials only just for the sole purpose of sort of using the diagrams as a visual to describe and show kind of the steps that I'm talking about. So that is one, well, it's one set of materials through 2 different publishers that are options for schools. Okay. All right. So what I wanted to do, a couple of different examples. And I actually today I wanted to pick on geometry a little bit because geometry doesn't often get a lot of love, as I've often seen. And so I wanted to start there. And we're going to take some time to look through everything. And so this first example that we're going to talk about is if I was starting in geometry and I was getting to the 3rd unit, then from the diagrams that I was just looking at, I would see that, oh, yes, the 3rd unit in geometry builds from the 2nd unit, but it also is relying on knowledge from the 2nd unit of grade 8. And I would see that the 2nd unit of grade 8 is relying on knowledge from grade 7, which in turn is relying on knowledge from grade 6, right? So if I'm wanting to be on grade level content and I'm teaching that third unit of geometry, which is about similarity, then what am I going to do as different unfinished learning shows up for my student, right? That's the whole framework here. I'm starting on grade level, and to borrow something from Jamie in the chat box from just a few minutes ago, right? Then I'm going to be ready to provide support just in time. I'm not going to assume that everybody needs that same level of support and kind of go back and reteach things. I'm going to start with the grade level learning, and I'm going to then be ready. Okay, I see unfinished learning. I'm going to be ready to address that just in time as the students need it. And I'm going to rely on the materials to provide, and I'm going to rely on the materials to provide me with what I need. Okay. Again, from Ed Reports, we report on the materials, and not all. As far as the materials themselves, because I see a comment about another set of materials, ready classroom materials. Again, these options may not present this coherence in this way. That maybe some just do it with charts, like a table. Some do it in lessons or units, and they don't necessarily do it overall. There's different ways in which the publishers and authors display this information for the purposes, but that information is there. And as I talked about in step 2 of like learning the coherence, these illustrations are nice, like these visual illustrations are nice for learning it, but there's all the information is there. It's just a matter of organizing it, because honestly, some of you might look at these visuals that I've pulled up and go, oh, I really wish I just had that in a table or something like that. So yeah, those would all be things that would be drawn out of the different sets of materials once they've been adopted by a school or a district. Okay. So let's go in and look at some lessons. Okay. And I am going to drop, let me grab my, so I just shared a link, and I want everybody to go in. I want you to imagine for a moment that, again, we're geometry teachers. We're teaching that third unit, and I'm going to stop sharing because I don't want you to have to, if your sharing takes over your screen. But I hope you'll be able to drop in. Can I maybe have a couple of people let me know that they're able? What you should see when you click on the link, I will show that real fast. What you should see is this. You should see it'll say lesson 1, scale drawings, goals, learning targets, lesson narrative. Thank you, Shannon. I hope, yes, thank you, Jennifer, both Jennifers. That's ironic, 2 Jennifers right in a row. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I want to pause for a moment, and I'm going to give you maybe like 3 to 5 minutes to look through this lesson plan. And as you look through this lesson plan, I want you to kind of note for yourself what you're seeing, right? That would begin to help you to address unfinished learning. And also, what are you seeing in the ways of strategies and supports that help you with differentiation? Again, range of learners, special populations, English language learners, all the different ways in which we might need to differentiate. So I'm going to give like 4 minutes to kind of read through You don't have to read word for word, but as you're looking through, especially around those ideas of unfinished learning and also addressing differentiation. So as you finish looking through, as you're wrapping up, I know you might get, I often get drawn in and I start looking at everything and trying to name everything, but I would love to just see one or two things, or maybe for one of the two questions that I've posed, but what are some things you're seeing that might help you begin to address unfinished learning? What are some things that you would see that start helping you address differentiation of the grade level learning? Right. So in the idea of different, right. So one of the big things around that a couple of people have put in the chat box, the unfinished learning part, right? At the top level, which is on page 1 of the lesson guide, it talks about what it's building on, what it's addressing, and what it's building towards, which is down on the top of page 2. But even beyond that, I don't know if you noticed, but as you get down into the individual like tasks that are within the lesson, right? It talks about what each task is doing, right? The task with the pictures of the hippopotami, that talks about how it's building on something from 7G1 and what it's building towards, and it continues on that way. And as far as differentiation, right? Yes, there are some clearly labeled supports for English language learners, supports for students with disabilities. We see the first of those on page 4, English learners on page 6. And we see these things clearly marked throughout. And as we know, and as is also noticed, different open questions and formative assessments for students, right? And so remember, in my slide deck and in the pictures that we had, right, we talked about one thing we saw in that picture was that this unit in geometry was built on a unit from grade 8. And that even kind of gets brought out here in the beginning of this lesson where it talks about building on 8G3. Well, I want to drop another link in the chat box for you, right? So this is what I'm talking about, all from the same materials. Well, here's a lesson from that grade 8 unit. Here's a lesson from that grade 8 unit. And I would like for you to drop into that unit and sort of start to look again, what are you seeing there? Same two questions, right? What are we seeing as supports around unfinished learning? And what are we seeing as supports around differentiation? A couple of other keys I'll point out as you're going through this grade 8. Make sure you also kind of take note of toward the beginning the instructional routines, and how they kind of then show up throughout, and also that it does talk about the required materials and what's in that. So again, I'll give you about a minute to look through. If anyone's having problems with that grade 8 link, please let me know. So as you're looking at this second lesson, another question I'd like for you to kind of ask yourself is, things might be labeled in the same way around support for students with disabilities or supports for English learners or instructional routines, but are you seeing all the same stuff all the time? Is it generic guidance that the materials are offering, or is that guidance and support kind of tailored to the content that the students are looking at in the lesson, the tasks that are in the lesson? And that's just something to kind of think about as you're examining this lesson. Okay. Now I'm going to, right. So as you look through the 8th grade lesson, you will see a lot of the same things. Reading levels are big. Students are not reading informational text as much. Sorry, I just was kind of repeating one of the chats I saw. Reading levels are a concern. Again, I think that's one thing with mathematics in general, the idea of multiple representations, that we don't always have to rely on students being able to read a problem per se, that we can translate to graphs or tables. We can bring in manipulatives, base 10 blocks, algebra tiles at the high school level. But we can also do things like allow students to work with a partner. There are some protocols that, like a 3 reads protocol, that materials will have mentioned and built into them to be able to help when there are issues reading the text. Because of our time, I pretty much am on time, but I want to drop in the grade 7. And then this, I want to get to this because this goes back to a question. So I've dropped in a couple of, I dropped in a grade 7 and grade 6, because remember when we started with geometry unit 3, sort of the map, the illustration had us going back. So I've dropped in lessons from each of those units. And to the question that was just put into the chat box, Jim, that is earlier when I talked about step 4 and I talked about refining the materials, that the question you're asking kind of goes right along with that step 4 where I was talking about making those refinements, right? So in particular, what I'm referring to, I'll just kind of start because it was the first lesson, right? The beginning of that first geometry lesson that I shared, it's lesson 1 from unit 3, starts out with pictures of hippopotami. Maybe students where you are, that's not going to relate to them. Maybe they need, maybe it's different animals. Maybe it's something else altogether, right? But it is a way to refine. It's thinking about refining what we have, not needing to like completely revise or bring something else in. A colleague of mine that I work with, she works a lot with elementary, and she's one of her favorite examples in this way is she talks, there's a set of materials, and the context of the problem was from like a Scandinavian country, and it talked about xylophoners and yodelers. And, this doesn't need to go into where it is, but to your point, Jim, and your question, xylophoners and yodelers didn't connect to the students with which she was working. Not just not connect. They didn't even necessarily have a picture of what that was. But we're from Kentucky. We have a big rivalry between the University of Louisville and University of Kentucky. Just like Washington, it might be a rivalry between University of Washington and Washington State University. And so she was able to change the context. She refined the context to be something around University of Kentucky fans and University of Louisville fans, but everything else that was there, she was able to use. It was a matter of just refining that context so that the students could better identify with the mathematics they were getting ready to be asked to complete. And so that's what goes into that step 4. I will say that publishers have come a long way on a lot of things in terms of providing guidance, offering suggestions and strategies. Unfortunately, though, I don't think it's completely fair to expect to be able to get everything from the publishers. They are, and I'll give kind of another example is, if a lot of sets of materials now, they will translate some things into different languages. And maybe you're working in an area that you need a language that isn't provided by the materials themselves. Well, that doesn't mean, though, that like that idea of taking the resources that are there and translating them into the language you need, right? We have tools now that can help with that. I'm not going to say they're perfect, but there are tools now, maybe like Google Translate or something else, that can help translate into languages that you need. But again, it's refining what you have. It's not going and creating something from scratch. Okay. And I see you lost your internet. I hope that kind of comes back. One more slide I want to definitely show, because this came up earlier, and I said I would get to it. This last lesson that I dropped in, the grade 6 lesson that you could be looking through, in that grade 6 lesson, in the beginning, it talks about that it's building on measurement and data standards from grades 5 and grade 4, right? And so again, we didn't see it earlier in the big picture, but I get into the lesson, maybe I'm the 6th grade teacher and I'm doing this lesson, and I see, I'm getting this is building on grades 4 and 5. I need some resources and some help for my grade 6 students. And what I did want to show, and let me go share screen. So here's the K5 picture for this same set of materials. So I was looking at the 6th grade lesson. It tells me that it was building on 4MD and 5MD. I would need to do a little bit in terms of I could go into the materials and see like what unit 4MD or 5MD lives in. But I just kind of wanted to bring this example to a close by showing that, again, I'm able to go as far back within the materials, and I can see what knowledge, what standards the authors intended to be the building blocks for that grade level learning I'm currently on, right? And it doesn't mean that I'm going to need all of this for every student. Again, it's learning that coherence so that you're able to provide that just-in-time support as you've accelerated into grade level content, because the students can, and that's what they need. But you're then able to, you're giving that equitable acceleration because we're ready with the supports to address the unfinished learning that each student has. Because that unfinished learning isn't going to be the same for every student as we move through the year. So I did want to just one more thing. So I had another example. Again, I was picking on geometry today. Another geometry lesson talking about volume in the high school and how that goes back again into grade 8, into grade 7, all the way back into grade 6. And again, we could take that back even farther. And if I dropped those lessons in and had you look at those, you would certainly be able to, you would see a lot of the same different supports that are there, different types of supports for differentiation, for unfinished learning. One thing I have not specifically talked about, but I would The mathematical practices, right? That is something, the reason why I include that in the title, those practices are the same, right? The wording of them, the idea of them is the same for every grade level. So again, part of addressing this unfinished learning, right? As students need that knowledge from prior grades, right? Like part of that is for them, it's making sense of the problem and being able to persevere the grade level work that we put in front of them, right? It is the use of the mathematical practices. What do they need to be able to reason and abstractly and quantitatively about the grade level mathematics that we're asking them? And I could go through all of the practices. They are, although not explicitly mentioned by me until now, they are inherent in all of this. In the guides, right? In the lesson guides, they are there, but they are also, they're inherent through all of these tasks and activities. So I know that we are coming up on the end of our time, just a couple of more minutes. And I just want to end by saying thank you for attending today. I know I would love to be able to have like seen more faces and interact and do some different things, but thank you so much for attending. I hope that you're walking away, to go back to some of those comments early on, I hope that you're walking away with a way in which you can start to think about this future school year, this upcoming school year and school years past, to be able to start students on grade level and have a plan for how you can address the unfinished learning that you know is going to arise, how you can differentiate for students to support them, be it English learners, be it students with special populations, ways to attach to their identity, and and work with your colleagues to go through that as you go into this school year. So I will stick around as long as possible. If there's any questions you want to type into the chat box, my email address is on the screen, and feel free to drop me an email at any time, and I will be happy to talk more about our adoption process, more about our website if you have questions about that, more about Coherence, more about equitable acceleration for students. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon, a great rest of the forum, and I appreciate it very much.